So this STEM story that I'm going to share with you is catering more towards high school, college level. So keep that in mind. That's who I developed this story for. So I am the Associate Director at the K-12 STEM Center. I've been here for about 2.5 years. And in my position, I have two primary roles. The first is I lead the elementary level initiative for the center. And the second part is I lead the assessment evaluation for the center. For the elementary work, I do programs directly supporting students. So you can see in the pictures on the right, I run various programs with the goal being to expose K-5 students to STEM so that they learn to value STEM, they see its importance in our society, and they develop the skills and knowledge to do STEM. And probably most importantly, that they develop the motivation to continue to engage in STEM experiences once they move on to middle school and high school. And so I also work with teachers. You can see on the left-hand side, I do programs with K-5 teachers, specifically in computer science, with the goal also being to develop their skills and knowledge and expertise in bringing computer science to their classrooms, and the motivation to do so and see its value. So that's what I do. Again, the other part is assessment evaluation. So helping different program managers at the center assess their programs, figure out what their outcomes are, what tools we need to measure those outcomes, and what activities they need to be incorporating in their programs to really be successful and integrate the best practices in STEM education. So my journey here is quite unconventional. I didn't take the approach that most people in my position would take. So I'll start at the beginning. So this is my STEM story. So I was born in Mexicali, Mexico, in the state of Baja California. You can see in the red dot on the map there, that's Mexicali, and Los Angeles is up on the left. I immigrated to the United States with my family, my 3 older sisters and my parents when I was just a toddler. My parents didn't speak English at all. So even though they had college degrees from Mexico, they weren't really worth anything in the US because of the language barrier. So they had to start at the very bottom with minimum wage jobs. So we didn't have a lot of money growing up. We lived in a mobile home in Santa Ana in Orange County, which is a low income area. And they didn't have any money to send my sisters and I to any after school programs or summer camps or any outside enrichment, whether it was STEM or not. We just didn't have the funds for that. So my exposure to science at that age was really limited. It was limited to my elementary school, which at the time was pretty much every other week we would open a science textbook and read from it. We would learn some vocab words. And every once in a while, we would watch a Bill Nye the Science Guy video. That was it. I don't remember doing any hands-on science experiments when I was in elementary. I do remember enjoying being outside, going to parks, being in nature, and I loved animals. But back then, that didn't have any connection to science because I just didn't know that it existed. So I would say in elementary, I didn't like science, but I also didn't hate science because I just didn't know anything about it. I didn't have any exposure to it. In middle school and high school, I did take science classes, mostly because they were required. And I learned from that experience that I really liked science. And it was mostly because I was good at it. But I was also really good at other things. I was good at writing, I was good at art and dance. So I really didn't know when I was graduating high school what I wanted to do. I liked science again, but I didn't love it. And so when I was applying to colleges, I applied as an undecided, undeclared major because I, again, had no idea what I wanted to do. I did apply to local colleges because I didn't have the money, or my parents didn't have the money to afford a dorm or an apartment. So I knew I was going to commute from home. So I ended up getting into UC Irvine, which was local to me. I was commuting the 4 years. That did make it hard to meet people having to commute, but I didn't have any other options. I was undecided, undeclared. I was taking biology classes because I liked it. And I decided I would just major in it because it felt like I could actually get a job with biology versus something like writing or art. And with a biology degree, you can do very few things. You can go to med school, which I didn't want to do. You can become a vet, which I considered, or you can do research. And so I tried the vet thing for a while because I loved animals. I interned at an animal shelter clinic. And I recall watching my first surgery. I was watching a dog getting spayed. And I remember having to walk out of the surgery because I was so nauseous. I felt like I was going to throw up because I just couldn't stand to see the blood. So that's when I knew that I did not want to be a vet. I couldn't be a vet. And so the next thing was to do research. So I joined the minority science program at UCI, which supports minorities doing biological science research. And I was placed in a lab that was studying the evolution and ecology of color vision in butterflies. And so it was mostly a genetics lab. So it was a lot of tedious lab work. And I was placed under the mentorship of a PhD student. And that PhD student did not want to be my mentor for whatever reason. She did not want to assist me. She didn't want to support me. She didn't want to help me out. So I was left to do a lot on my own and try to figure it out on my own. There were no other undergrads in the lab or grad students. It was just us two. And so I developed a lot of imposter syndrome, which is feeling like you're not good enough, that you shouldn't be there, because I just didn't have the support I needed. And I remember one time I was running a PCR. So a PCR is essentially a way for scientists to copy or amplify small parts of DNA so that they can better study it. And I messed up the PCR. So I went to the grad student and I told her what happened, and she got really upset. She started yelling at me, saying not nice things, and walked out on me. And I remember leaving the lab that day and I started crying because I just felt like a big failure. I felt like, again, I wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't smart enough to be there. That lab work was just not something I could do effectively. And so I quit the lab, and I was going to quit the program altogether and just not do research. But the director of the minority science program encouraged me to try another lab. So I thought, okay, I'll give it one more shot. So I was placed in the lab with Dr. Nancy Burley at UCI, and she studied ecology and evolutionary biology of zebra finches. So these cute little birds on the screen. And it was such an amazing experience, so different from the one before. I was working outside in the outdoor aviary. I was feeding the birds, cleaning cages. I was helping the grad students with their projects. I was doing behavioral tests on the birds, doing observations and banding and identifying the birds. So banding the birds means basically we attach these colored bands on the bird's legs, you can see here, in different patterns and different combinations in order to identify them, because they're living in these large flocks of about 50 birds, and we have to use binoculars to identify the individual birds and what they're doing. And that was an amazing experience. Dr. Burley, for whatever reason, saw a lot of promise in me. So she supported me the way she supported her grad students. She invited me to attend their weekly journal sessions where they reviewed literature. She encouraged me to lead my own research project, to publish, and to present at different conferences. It was really amazing. She supported me in writing up my work, and she gave me the ability to be first author in that publication, which is really rare for a faculty member to give an undergraduate in their lab first authorship. So that was amazing of her, and she was really supportive of my work. So I'll share real quick a little bit about my research project there. So zebra finches are native to Australia, and their diet consists primarily of seeds. Now, the protein levels in the seeds varies depending on the rainy season or the wet season. And so my question was, how do the different levels of protein in their diet influence the growth and cognitive abilities of these zebra finches? Because we knew that protein had impacts on those different things in different animal species. So that was my question. And so I reared male zebra finches on either a high protein diet or a low protein diet. And during their lifespan, I measured their body mass, their body size, their head size, and then I tested their cognition through an associative learning task. So associative learning task is basically the ability to associate two things together. And so I would place my birds into this apparatus that I built, and their goal was to learn to associate this yellow colored curtain with the presence of food. So all the other chambers in this apparatus had black curtains and no food behind them. And so I was assessing how many errors it took for them to finally figure it out, different behaviors that they were engaging in as they were learning the task, and essentially trying to figure out how easy it was for them to learn it. And so what I found was that the birds that were reared on the high protein diet did in fact have larger body mass, larger head size, and learn the associative learning tasks much quicker than the birds on the low protein diet. The next step was to determine how the protein in their diet influenced their social learning, because these birds in the wild forage in flocks, so they're social animals. And so that was the next step of my project, but I didn't get to do it because I graduated. And towards the end of my time in college, my mentor, Dr. Burley, encouraged me to apply to PhD programs. So I applied to UC Davis's Animal Behavior PhD program and Cornell University's Neurobio and Behavior PhD program. And I got accepted into both. It wasn't actually as hard of a decision as most people would think. I ended up choosing UC Davis for two reasons. My then boyfriend here in the corner, who became my fiance that summer, got into UC Davis for engineering PhD. And then also, I just didn't want to be someplace that snowed. I remember going to my interview at Cornell that February, and my ears were just burning because it was so cold there. And I knew coming from Southern California, I wouldn't be able to last there. So I went to UC Davis that fall to study animal behavior. And I got to study elephants, zoo elephants specifically, which was pretty cool and a pretty unique experience. But having gone from zebra finches in an aviary at UCI to zoo elephants was a pretty big jump. And I felt like I had no idea what I was doing. Most of the grad students in the program had been studying their study species for many years. Most of them had gone into the program with a master's or with an internship, having done internships with really impressive people in exotic places like Costa Rica, and I didn't have any of that. I was also by far the youngest, having gone straight from undergrad in the program. And I just didn't look like any of the other students. I had different interests, so it was really hard to connect. And again, I felt that imposter syndrome, like I wasn't meant to be there, I didn't belong, and I had just gotten lucky getting accepted into the program. And so that was something I struggled with my entire time in my grad program. But I just powered through it. I tried to make friends the best I could. My fiance was really supportive, so that was nice to have him there. But my research, as I mentioned, involves zoo elephants. And I was involved with one of the largest multi-institutional programs of its kind in terms of assessing welfare of zoo elephants. It was a multi-million-dollar grant that I was involved with. And essentially, we were looking at the welfare of zoo elephants in North America with trying to determine how we can improve their welfare state. So one of the interesting findings that we found was that the social environment, specifically how often elephants are alone versus in a social group, influences their welfare positively. So if they're in a social group, that's a good thing. If they're alone, that's a bad thing. Another thing we found was that enrichment influences their welfare. So enrichment is something like, you can think of it as a toy. For if you have a dog or a cat, you'll give them, if they're a cat, you'll give them catnip or a jingle bell. If they're a dog, you'll give them a Kong where you put food inside and they have to like try to get the food out. The pumpkin in the GIF right there is an example of enrichment. So the more enrichment that elephants had, the more often that they were with other social groups, the better their welfare, which was measured through physiology, behavior, and neurobiology. And so that's some really interesting stuff that we found. Specifically, my work, I had different questions. I was looking at, how does sociality in zoo elephants look like? So beyond just being in the presence of a social group, what are they actually doing? How are they bonding? How are they communicating? I also was asking, how are the social behaviors of my elephants related to keeper assessments of their sociability, of their social bonds? So keepers of zoo elephants develop really strong relationships with them. Their elephants are like dogs. They have very unique personalities, and keepers get really attached to them. So I wanted to see how their assessment compared to my assessment. And then how are social behaviors related to the welfare indicators that we were measuring, specifically how the bonds and relationships were connected. So I found a lot of interesting stuff, probably too much to go into detail now. I could spend an hour talking about this, but I did publish a few papers on it. I had a really great PhD student mentor, Dr. Joy Mensch. She was awesome, really supportive and kind. I've heard a lot of horror stories, specifically my fiance and others, who just had a really hard time in grad school because of their mentor, specifically their faculty mentor, who just did not know how to support grad students. So yeah, I got lucky in a sense. About halfway, a little bit more than halfway through my PhD program, I realized I didn't love what I was doing. It was really cool, it was really interesting, but I wasn't loving it. And I'm someone who really is driven by passion in my work. And so I decided about year 3 or so that I didn't want to be an academic. I didn't want to pursue academia. I didn't want to become a professor, but I wanted to finish my PhD because I was pretty close to finishing. And so during that time, I started doing outreach with elementary school kids. It was part of my NSF award, which I forgot to mention was something I won early on, which is really great. But I had to do outreach. And so I was going to elementary schools, talking about science. And I was really nervous the first time. I thought the students wouldn't like me, they'd be really bored, but it went great. And that was really the moment where I felt like, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to talk to kids about science. I want to teach them about science and get them excited about it. My experience in grad school really was what made me feel like a scientist. After that experience, I was a different person. I learned how to think critically, how to be a skeptic, how to just approach life differently by asking questions and persevering. And I felt like those were all skills that anybody could have or develop. Even kids as young as kindergarten could be working on those skills. And so I wanted to do that. I wanted to bring those skills to those kids. And so it was a little scary. After I graduated with my PhD, I didn't have a job for 5 to 6 months because I was trying to switch careers. So I ended up volunteering for an organization in Sacramento called Sierra Nevada Journeys, and I was doing science outreach programs with kids in the classroom and leading field trips, and I loved it. But I was a volunteer, so I was doing it for free for about 5 to 6 months. I was really passionate about it though, and I worked hard, and so I was offered a part-time position as coordinator, but I was getting paid minimum wage. And having spent 5 years doing a PhD, to be having a part-time minimum wage job was a little disheartening and a little frustrating. But I didn't have a choice. Nobody really cared that I had a PhD. I had to get the experience before I could get a better job. And so I eventually worked my way to Orange County, back to Orange County. I got hired as the 4-H advisor of Orange County. 4-H focuses on youth development. And so I was doing mostly youth development work with a little bit of STEM on the side. but I didn't love it. And so again, being someone driven by my passions, I wanted to find jobs where I could focus solely on STEM education. And so eventually that led me here 2.5 years ago to the K-12 STEM Center, where I'm really able to apply everything I learned in my PhD program in terms of data collection, data management, analysis, learning to read literature effectively and implement it into your work. And of course, bring that passion of STEM to young audiences. And so that's where I am here. And that's my STEM story.